Hey everybody, it's Eric from epautos.com, your libertarian car guy. I wanted to talk to you today about the Hyundai Ioniq, which you probably don't know about. It is the hybrid competitor of the Toyota Prius chiefly, and also of its brother from the same mother, the Kia Niro. Difference between the two of them being chiefly that the Niro is a small crossover SUV and this is a conventional hatchback sedan. So it's more directly comparable to the Prius. Interestingly, it beats the Prius at most of the Prius-ish things that have made the Prius the most successful of hybrids. In the first place, it's significantly less expensive to start by about $1,300, which is significant if you're buying a hybrid for purposes of trying to save some money. And it also saves you more on gas. This thing can average close to 60 miles per gallon. It gets 9 miles per gallon better on the highway than the Prius, which is really interesting. The highway figure for this car is 59 miles per gallon, which is really spectacular. The Prius's mileage on the highway is considerably less. It is only 50 miles on the highway. Its city mileage is also slightly less than this little Hyundai's. And in addition to that, as if that weren't enough, the Hyundai also has substantially more back seat room by about 2 inches than the Prius, and that's important if you're going to be sitting back there, particularly if you're a big tall geek like me. And it's got slightly more cargo room too. The main thing that it shares in common with the Prius, and also with its brother from the same mother, the Niro, is that it is a dedicated hybrid. And I've written about this before. You may not be aware, so I'll explain. With the exception of those models, and there may be one or two others that I'm forgetting, but I'm getting senile, so you'll have to bear with me. But by and large, most of the hybrids on the market are what I call converted hybrids, meaning they began life as a standard IC car. They were designed to be an IC car, and then at some point the manufacturer of that car decided to offer a hybrid variant of it. For example, you can get a hybrid version of the Camry, but the Camry began life as a regular internal combustion engine car. The downside to that is that it was not designed to be a hybrid, so generally what happens is, in order to make the hybrid thing work, they have to really compromise certain things. One of the things that they really compromise, of course, is cargo carrying capacity, because the batteries have to go somewhere, and there's just not a lot of room in a car that didn't start out as a designed dedicated hybrid. This car and the Prius, the designers had to think about, well, where are we going to put the batteries when they were making the vehicle? So they spread them out more evenly and unobtrusively and unnoticeably throughout the car, so that in both cases you get somewhere between 24 and 26 cubic feet of total cargo carrying capacity. Whereas if you look at the typical converted hybrid, let's say it starts out with a 14 or 15 cubic foot trunk, because of the batteries, you'll end up with like an 8 or a 9 cubic foot trunk in some places, so that's a real liability. The other liability is that the gas mileage is not particularly fantastic. Some of the very best of them, like the Ford Fusion Hybrid, average about 45 miles per gallon, which is pretty decent, but it's about 10 miles per gallon below something like this, and the reason being, again, that it is a converted hybrid, and they tend to be heavier, which makes them less efficient. These things, having been conceived as hybrids from the get-go, are relatively light for a hybrid. This thing weighs just over 3,000 pounds. The Prius is slightly heavier, but not much heavier, by about 50 pounds. Okay, the other thing that you should know about this car versus the Prius, this thing's substantially more powerful. Total output of the gas engine and the electric motor and the batteries is 164 horsepower. The Prius has less power, and it's substantially less quick as a result. The Prius is known for being slightly not speedy. It takes about 10 seconds or so for it to get to 60. This thing will do it in about 8.5. That's about in the ballpark of other 4-cylinder, non-hybrid economy sedans, and it's 2 full seconds quicker than the Prius, which is no small difference. And It's a pretty spectacular difference when you reflect on the fact that this thing is actually more fuel efficient than the Prius, and it costs about $1,300 less. You think about that, if you're thinking about buying one of these things for purposes of saving money, how much gas does $1,300 buy you in a vehicle that averages 55 or 56 miles per gallon? It's probably close to a full year's worth of gas, or at least 8 or 9 or 10 months worth of gas. And again, that's no small savings. Imagine if when you went out to buy a car, the dealer said, hey, here you go, here's a free gas card for the next 10 months or 12 months. That would probably be a pretty strong incentive for you to buy that particular car. The other thing, and this is subjective, that I personally really like about this Ioniq is that it's an unobtrusive hybrid. It doesn't try to tout its hybridness, either in terms of how it looks from the outside, or how it looks from the inside, or how it drives. So I'm going to pan around the interior here and point out some of the differences versus the Prius. I'll start here. You'll see I'm pointing at what looks like and what functions like a conventional gear selector. In the Prius, you've got like a little toggle thing that's like a Game Boy that hangs off the front of the center stack that has very little tactile feel, and personally I'm not a huge fan of it. This thing strikes me as just being more ergonomic and more interactive. You feel like you're more involved in actually driving the car. And the rest of the way the car is laid out in here, you've got a conventional gauge cluster that's mounted in the line of sight of the driver, and a more or less conventional center stack with the LCD on top of the climate controls. In the Prius, everything is centrally mounted, and it's all very hybrid-y, if you like. It's really hard to not notice that you're driving a hybrid, and of course on the outside the Prius is immediately recognizable as a hybrid. In the current model, they really doubled down on that and made it look really radically different. So again, if you want to get noticed for driving a hybrid, the Prius is the one you want. If you really don't want people noticing you or noticing the fact that you're driving a hybrid, you might prefer this. Personally, I prefer this. And the main reason that I do is that, like it or not, the Prius has got this reputation of being a sort of Al Gorean, snowflake, save the planet, slow driving kind of a car. I know there are a lot of people out there who aren't like that, who own Priuses and who buy them because they want to save money on gas. Absolutely. But it does have that reputation, just like other cars have reputations, just like Porsches have reputations. You probably heard the joke, the difference between the Porsche and the Porcupine is that in the Porsche, the prick is on the inside. Anyway, I kind of like to not be noticed when I'm out driving. I think that that's just sound policy. And I like that this thing is much less visually noticeable and also functionally noticeable. It doesn't drive as much like a hybrid as the Prius does. And one of the reasons for that is that it has a fairly conventional transmission. It has an automated manual or dual clutch transmission. The Prius still uses a CVT. And the chief difference there is the CVT makes a lot of racket. You hear a lot of noise coming from it relative to a regular manual or a regular automatic or an automated manual. This thing you just really don't notice it's a hybrid. In particular, if you turn off the hybrid display, you could be driving any other economy car. This looks and drives and feels very much like the little Elantra sedan that I had a couple of weeks ago, and that's been reviewed up at epautos.com. Anyway, I will have more hopefully over the weekend, but that's enough for now. Thanks for viewing, and we'll catch up with you again soon.